Eastern State Prison, Philadelphia, episode 4. We left off with a model of the institution, which gives us a sense of its wider architectural design. But let's go back into the compound. And this is a revealing photograph of the central tower. Again, de Havilland designed this institution according to the radial plan, the spoke and the hub. And this is the hub. This is the central unit of control and surveillance. Now, you're going to hear me say this a few times if you watch some of these other videos, and that is that Michel Foucault, famous French philosopher who wrote at length about penology and the birth of the prison, has reminded us that the prison was designed as the original laboratory for the development and diffusion of surveillance. The original laboratory for the development and diffusion of surveillance, because the environment could be controlled by the authorities. We'll talk a little bit more about that later and in other videos. But the control center, one of the items on the control center that this watchtower that really caught my eye was, if you notice, there is a clock. And I found this to be particularly ingenious. I've worked in a lot of prisons in the United States and toured prisons in other countries. And in one of the prisons I worked at in the U.S., at the time, the convicts were allowed to wear their civilian clothes. Now, they could not wear hats. They couldn't wear ball caps or any of that, but they could wear their civilian clothes. And very often they would wear army field jackets that you could buy at a surplus store. And those field jackets had high collars. And so when they were out in the yard, they would frequently pull up their collars to try to shield their face, so as to obstruct any recognition of them from a distance, from the guards, from the hacks as they called them. And here they had the ingenious idea to put the clock on the guard tower. So when prisoners wanted to see what time it was, they would obviously gaze up at the guard tower, allowing their face, allowing their identity to be exposed to the guards in the tower. Surveillance. Now, a tour of Eastern State is very worthwhile. And there are 3 pathways to facilitate this prison tourism. One of which is a guided tour by extremely well-informed guides as curators who have enormous interest and knowledge in Eastern State and have the capacity to transmit that information to visitors. There's also the audio guide, which I also recommend. And the audio guide has a voice that a lot of people will recognize because it is Mr. Pink, Steve Buscemi, who became extremely interested in the preservation of Eastern State. And finally, the exploration of Eastern State on your own, without any real sense of itinerary, just you and your mobile phone, your camera, maybe a friend, family member, maybe alone, and engage in this sense of absorption, taking in the surroundings. Very worthwhile. The whole, the Klondike. Isolation was always used at Eastern State. But the use changed drastically over time. In the early decades, the prison housed every inmate in strict solitary confinement as part of the controversial Pennsylvania system. Now, the reason why that's controversial is because total isolation is a form of deprivation, sensory deprivation. So to be locked up 24 hours without any meaningful contact with another human being for long periods of time is detrimental psychologically, emotionally, and physically. So eventually the Pennsylvania system abandoned this isolation and became more aligned with what was known as the New York system, the Auburn system, where prisoners were kept in isolation during their sleeping hours, but during the day they worked in congregate gangs. They worked in shops in the presence of other convicts. Although they were enforced silence, which was difficult to uphold, but nevertheless, the Pennsylvania system under the Quaker design was, in the long run, abandoned. In the 20th century, isolation in Eastern State was used as punishment. Down the steps to your left beneath cell block 14 are 4 small cells with low ceilings and no plumbing. This was the 20th century punitive isolation known as the Hole or the Klondike. And there you go. I was particularly taken by this feature of the design because if you look closely and ask critically, what are these windows? And why the shape and narrow windows being installed in this part of the prison? Well, this is a remnant of the fortress. These are arrow slits that have no function in a modern prison, but nevertheless hark back to the power of the medieval castle. Now, Eastern State also is an exhibition space where they allow artists to engage in artistic expression. This is a painted glass of Carnival and Lent and the artist's interpretation of the struggle, but this is not part of the original design. And here we see the sentry box once again. Now back to this notion of surveillance, visibility, being able to see everything at once. That's panopticism. And although this is not a panopticon per se, it is panoptic in design, and the intention is to expand the visual field of the guards. And this is the epicenter right here where I'm pointing with the cursor. And from that position, the guard can view a linear optical range of surveillance all the way down the tier. This is the laboratory of surveillance. And here we are. You see the skylight, Do you see the vanishing point? Visibility. And once again, this is if you were paying attention, this is a 2-tier cell block that was added to the original blueprint. The original design had 1 tier, 1 single floor, 1 level, and here we see a 2nd tier with a catwalk that allows the guard to patrol the tier, walking the length of the ledge, providing more surveillance. Very impressive design. This is very interesting, very revealing. This is a plaque on display to the everlasting honor of those inmates of Eastern State Penitentiary, Pennsylvania, who served in the Army and Navy during the war. This is the First World War. And those who served are honored, are venerated, not by name, but by their number, their prison number, who died for their country. Anonymity. It would be so easy just to list them by name and honor them. However, preserving the tradition of anonymity. A memorial. Let's pause.